Hi everyone, so this is the Chapter 9 help video for the more difficult questions at the end of Chapter 9 in your Connect assignment this week. So we'll start with number 14 and we'll just read through it and kind of work through it from there. So case 9.1 says the following information is presented on a patient's Medicare MSN. What does the patient owe? So the bill is submitted and it has the doctor's information here. The date is 2/10/2016, one service and service code, one destruction of hemorrhoids, and it has the code there 46934-78. Medicare charges are $325. The approved amount is $194.78. There's a little notation here for you that you need to read. The approved amount is based on the Medicare fee schedule, so that's important to notate. So the explanation here is of the total charges, Medicare has approved $194.78, and the approved amount is the amount, let me scroll over here, that the provider has agreed to accept. In order for them to be contracted with Medicare, they have accepted to, or if they are, excuse me, I should reword that a little bit better. If they are a participating provider, then they have agreed to accept the Medicare approved amount. So the approved amount is $194.78. The 20% that the patient is responsible for is $38.96. And then that makes the 80% that the Medicare is going to pay $155.82. So if the patient's already met the deductible, we need to know the amount that's owed by the patient. Well, if they've already met the deductible, then there's no additional monies owed to the provider for deductible costs. So the only thing that the patient would owe in this instance would be $38.96. And let me show you how that came about. We found my calculator over here. Okay, so $194.78, and that's the approved amount. Okay, and you take that and multiply that by the 20%. It's going to give you the $38.95, which rounds to $38.96 there, because the 6 over here will make this $38.96. Okay, so that's how that goes. That $38.96 plus $155.82 is going to total this $194.78. Now, if you're wondering what happens to the remainder of that, let's figure that out really quickly. $325, which was the original charge, minus $194.78, that ends up being $130.22. That amount is going to be written off, and that is part of the agreement to accept assignment from Medicare. So basically the doctor says, we're charging $325. Medicare says, that's fantastic, but we're only paying $194.78, so figure that out. And so the doctor says, okay, well, the patient has to pay their 20% copay of that, which is $38.96. Medicare is going to pay $155.82, and the doctor basically writes off the remainder of that. Now, you don't have to put in for this question the remainder of the write-off amount, but I just wanted to show you where the rest of that money went. Okay, so let's check. And we're good to go. $38.96. Okay, so case 9.2. This is number 15, I think. Case 9.2, the physicians, we're going to fill out the blanks here. Okay, so the physician standard fee is $210. The Medicare fee is $115. Okay. Medicare pays 80%, patient or supplemental plan pays 20%, provider adjustment or the write-off amount, we're going to have to figure that out too. Now, I would like for you to note that, let me see if I can get my little highlighter here. this is a participating provider. That's very important, okay? Also here, we're going to note that that's a non-participating provider, and then, oops. Down here, lastly, we're going to note that this is a non-participating provider that does not accept assignment. So those are going to be key things that we need to remember as we're working through these problems, because that's going to make a big difference in the amount that the patient is responsible for. Okay? So back up to the top we go. $210 is the standard fee. The Medicare fee is $115. So $210 is what's billed. Because this provider is a participating provider, Medicare fee, so what they're willing to pay of that $210 is $115. Okay? Let me get my little calculator back up here. Of that $115, Medicare is going to pay 80%, so $115 times, oops, so times 0.8 is $92. And then 115 minus 92 leaves us $23, which is the 23% for the patient to pay. Sometimes I don't trust my math because I'm not the most fantastic at math, so sometimes I'll double check it. So 115 times 0.2 is going to give us 23. So I just like to double check there. So what that means is that 92 plus 23 is going to total that 115 that the Medicare is willing to pay. And since they are only willing to pay $115 of the $210 bill, we have to write off the remainder amount. So to figure that out, we take 210 minus 115, and that makes our write-off amount $95. Okay, so that's a participating provider. Now we're moving on to a non-participating provider, but one who still accepts assignment. So if, you know what, let me go back up here really quickly. I just want to make note that this write-off amount can never be billed to a patient. So that's important to notate. You can never bill the write-off amount to a patient. That's part of being contracted with Medicare. The practice just absorbs the cost. Nobody pays for it. Medicare is not going to pay for it. The patient is not going to pay for it. It's just written off, okay? And that will apply here in this next problem also. So this, again, is a non-participating provider, but is somebody who accepts assignment. So this is the deal. In the case of a non-participating provider, but one who still accepts assignment, Medicare will pay out 5% less than a provider who is participating. So this $210 fee, you can see up here, they pay out $115 of the $210 fee for a participating provider. Here, they're only going to pay out $109.25 of that $210 fee because this non-participating provider who still accepts assignment gets a 5% cut from their payment. Okay, so basically we do the math again. So $109.25 is the non-participating fee that's going to be reimbursed to the practice, and Medicare is going to pay 80% of that. So 109.25 times 0.8 gives us $87.40. And then 109.25 times 0.2 gives us $21.85. That's the other 21%. You can go ahead and add those two together to verify that that makes 109.25 if you want to double check your math. And then to find the write-off amount, we take 210 minus 109.25. And that's going to give us a write-off amount of $100.75. Okay? So those two are fairly straightforward. It's basic math, 80-20. When we get down here to this non-participating provider who does not accept assignment, things get a little bit trickier. Okay. So there's some things you need to know here. First of all, the physician standard fee is the same. Second of all, this Medicare non-participating fee here is $109.25. And I know that's the same as it is here, but there's some differences here because we have this thing called a limiting charge on this third line here. And the limiting charge is 115% of the Medicare non-participating fee. Okay, so this limiting charge we need to figure out first. So we need to figure out what 115% of $109.25 is. Okay. Clear. So 109.25 plus 115. Where's my percent? Is going to end up giving us $125.63. I know it should be 64, but just for ease, let's do 63. So 125.63. Okay. So that's the patient's limiting charge. And the patient's limiting charge, again, is going to be, let me see. I don't know if I can type this in here or not, but we'll try. 100 and it's not going to be pretty here, but we'll try it. 115%. Ooh, that got big. All right. All right, so that's 115%. Well, there was no point in doing that because it just went away, huh? So sorry. Okay. Now, the patient, there are a couple other things we got to figure out. We're going to figure out what the patient is billed, what Medicare is going to pay the patient. So notice that that's different. In the other two scenarios, Medicare is going to pay 80% to the provider. Here, Medicare is going to pay directly to the patient. So what happens here is we figure out this limiting charge. The limiting charge, again, is 115% of the Medicare non-participating fee. And then what happens next is the provider is going to collect the full payment at the patient's time of visit. And then if Medicare approves it, they will pay out 80% of the allowed amount on that non-participating fee schedule, which is not the same thing as the limiting amount. You need to be aware of that. That is not the same thing as the limiting amount. And then it will send the patient, the payment directly to the patient, okay? So let's do the math here. So the patient is going to be billed the same thing as the limiting charge here, $125.63, okay? And Medicare is going to pay the patient, and I'll show you how we get this $125.63 in just a second, okay? So the patient, the provider is going to collect $125.63. Now let me show you where these two come from. Medicare is going to pay the patient 80% of the allowed amount of the non-participating fee schedule. That means it's 80% of this number here of 109.25, okay? So let's figure that out. 109.25 times 0.8 is 174. That's not right. 109.25 times 0.8. 87.40. Okay, so 87.40 goes here. And then, since we're allowed to bill a little bit higher because of this limiting charge here, we're going to take 120 to figure out what the patient's out-of-pocket expense is going to be, what they're going to eat out of this after Medicare pays. We're going to take 125.63 minus 87.4, and that's going to give us 38.23 that goes here, okay? So I don't know if you've jumped ahead of me yet and done the math, but 38.23 and 87.40 equals the amount that the patient is billed. And then once that bill is sent to, and they're going to pay the provider this upfront at the time of visit, and then they can submit to Medicare for reimbursement of 80% of not this limiting charge, but instead this non-participator fee of $109.25. If they are approved for reimbursement of that $109.25, then they will receive a check from Medicare for $87.40. And then they just eat, the patient eats, because they will have already paid this $38.23 to the provider up front. That's just, part of their bill. That's their responsibility. So you can kind of see how using a participating provider ends up being much more economical for both the provider and also for the patient as well, definitely for the patient. In the first scenario, the patient has $95 written off. So they, write that portion off, and the patient pays a $23 copay. Okay. And then, the practice gets $92 for taking Medicare. And then in the second scenario, the practice ends up receiving a little bit lesser amount because they're not participating, but they do accept assignment. So they only get $87.40, and the patient pays $21.85, and then the provider loses a little bit more money for not participating in the Medicare program. And then down at the bottom, same fee, and the provider can collect this $125.63, but the patient is the one that ends up paying the most out of the pocket there. So it just kind of depends on if they really like their doctor or not. If they end up having a doctor that does not accept assignment, then, or does not participate in Medicare, and they can afford to stay with that doctor, then that's fine. But otherwise, they may have to look elsewhere for a new physician or a new primary care that does accept assignment and participate in Medicare. Okay, so that's it for 14 and 15. If you have questions, let me know.